Hornblower and the Hotspur by C.S. Forester. Read by Ioan Gruffud. Side 1. Repeat after me. I, Horatio, take thee, Maria Ellen. The thought came up in Hornblower's mind that these were the last few seconds in which he could withdraw from doing something which he knew to be ill-considered. To have and to hold. He was still, like an automaton, repeating the parson's words. Bush was ready with the ring, and Hornblower slipped it over Maria's finger, and the final words were said. I now pronounce that they are man and wife. "No, I can kiss my son-in-law," announced Mrs. Mason loudly, and Hornblower found himself clasped by two powerful arms. But here was Bush to disengage him, with outstretched hand, offering felicitations and best wishes. He had been a tower of strength in this wedding, just as he had been in the preparation of the Hotspur for sea. "I'll see you again at the breakfast, sir." And with that he withdrew from the vestry. They came out of the dim light into the bright sun. Hornblower heard a sharp word and a ragged clash of steel, and there were 50 seamen from the Hotspur in a double rank, making an arch of their drawn cutlasses. "Oh, how nice," said Maria, in childish delight. Furthermore, the array of seamen had attracted a crowd of spectators, all craning forward to see the captain and his bride. It was a good turnout. Beyond the avenue of cutlasses stood a horseless post-chaise, with Bush standing behind it. "Let the break off, if you please, sir." Hornblower obeyed. The seaman took the strain and then broke into a trot, the post-chaise rattling over the cobbles, heading at the double towards the George, and with a turn Maria was flung against him and clasped him in delicious fear. "Welcome, sir. Welcome, madam. This way, sir, madam." Their host flung open the door into the coffee-room to reveal the wedding breakfast. Here came the others, pouring in, and any trace of awkwardness about the party disappeared as Mrs. Mason marshalled the guests and set the celebration into its stride. Corks popped, and preliminary toasts were drunk, and Hornblower was still engaged on this work when he became aware of the innkeeper whispering hoarsely at his side. "The Admiral's compliments, sir, and he would be glad to see you when you find it convenient." "I'll go up at once, thank you." When he knocked at the door of the first-floor front, a deep voice that he well remembered said, "Come in." Cornwallis. Billy Blue had not changed perceptibly during 4 years. "My apologies for interrupting your wedding, but you must blame Bonaparte, not me." "Of course, sir." "Is Hotspur ready to sail?" "No, sir." "How long?" 2 days, sir. More if there's delay with the ordnance stores." "You'll need 3 months' provisions and water." "I can stow 111 days at full rations, sir." "Have you warped her out?" "Yes, sir. She's at anchor now in Spithead." "You've done well," said Cornwallis. "Now for your orders. War's coming. It hasn't been declared yet, but Boney may anticipate us. I'm going to blockade Brest as soon as I can get the fleet to sea, and you're to go ahead of us. When war's declared, you can, of course, take the appropriate action. Until then, you have merely to observe. But remember this. You'll find it hard to perform your duty unless you risk your ship. Make the right choice, and I'll see you through any trouble that may ensue." Cornwallis's wide blue eyes looked straight into Hornblower's brown ones. "By Jove, I've taken you away from your wedding breakfast. Perhaps I could join the festivities and drink the bride's health." When Hornblower appeared again through the door of the coffee-room, Mrs. Mason's instant and bitter reproaches died away the moment she saw that he was ushering in an important guest. "A glass of wine, sir?" "With pleasure." Cornwallis took the glass in his hand and looked around. "Has the health of the happy couple been drunk yet?" "No, sir," answered Mrs. Mason in a perfect ecstasy. "Then may I do so? Ladies, gentlemen, I ask you all to stand and join me on this happy occasion. I give you the health of the bride and groom." For some time after Cornwallis had left, Hornblower stood by the half-closed door of the coffee-room in deep thought, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, which was the nearest he could get to pacing up and down. War was coming. He had always been certain of that. He was in command of his own ship, and was being set in the forefront of the battle. This was his golden chance to distinguish himself. He turned and re-entered the coffee-room, closing the door behind him. Hornblower was still trying to be a good host when he saw the innkeeper was ushering in Hornblower's new coxswain, Hewitt. He came rolling across the room, his straw hat in his hand, and knuckling his forehead, gave Horatio a note. Silence fell on the assembled company as he read the few lines. Sir, I hear from the dockyard that the first of the lighters is ready to come alongside. Your obedient servant, William Bush. My dear, said Hornblower. You're going to the ship again, said Maria. Yes. He could not stay away while there was work to be done. I'll be back again this evening, he said, and forced himself to smile. Nothing shall keep me from you, dear. Someone must have been knocking at the bedroom door for some time. Hornblower had been conscious of it, but was too stupid with sleep to think more about it. Maria's grip tightened as Hornblower found his voice. Very well, I'm awake. Darling, we're being parted, whispered Maria. I can't think how I'm going to live without you. You're my whole life. She kissed him once more, and then tore herself free. Your clean shirt's on the chair, dear, and your second-best shoes are beside the fireplace. I must run down to see that your breakfast is ready, she said, and was gone before he could protest. He folded his neckcloth carefully, but with practised fingers, and slipped on his coat. Bubbling with excitement, he opened the window curtains and glanced outside. No sign of dawn as yet. Bag in hand, he went downstairs and into the coffee-room. Maria held the back of the chair for him to be seated. I'll sit down after you, said Hornblower. It went against the grain to have Maria waiting on him. Oh, no, I have your breakfast to attend to. A rattling on the windows attracted their attention. Hornblower looked at his watch. 10 minutes to 5, and he had ordered his boat to be at the Sally Port at 5. Maria saw the gesture. There was a slight trembling of her lips, a slight moisture in her eyes, but she kept herself under control. They walked out into the keen, cold air, having to adjust their eyes to the darkness even after the miserable light of the coffee-room. You have the £17 safely? asked Hornblower. Yes, thank you, dearest, and you'll be able to draw my monthly half-pay. It is time to say goodbye now, darling. He kissed her. Down at the water's edge there was the familiar rattle of oars on thwarts and the sound of male voices as his boat's crew perceived the two shadowy figures on the hard. There was nothing else to say now, nothing else to do. He turned his back on Maria, he turned his back on peace and on civilian married life, and walked down towards war. Blackwater now, sir, and anchors hove short, sir. Thank you, Mr. Bush. Get the ship under way, if you please. Aye, aye, sir. Hornblower could see in a flash that he could place implicit reliance on Bush's seamanship. He knew he should never have doubted it, but his memories were 2 years old and might have been blurred by the passage of time. Now, Mr. Prowse, the wind's holding steady at the moment. I want a course for Ushant. Ushant, sir? Aye, aye, sir. Mr. Bush, you may dismiss the watch below, and send the hands to breakfast when you think proper. Aye, aye, sir. Who's the officer of the watch? Cargill, sir. He has charge of the deck, then. Course is south-west by west, half-west, sir. Thank you, Mr. Prowse. You may mark it on the board. Mr. Cargill, tack the ship, if you please. Aye, aye, sir. Hornblower withdrew aft. He wanted not merely to observe how Cargill handled the ship, but also how Hotspur behaved. When war should come, it was not a mere possibility, but a definite probability that success or failure, freedom or captivity, might hinge on how Hotspur went about, how handy she was in stays. Haul mainsail! Haul! This was the crucial moment. Round came the yards, but the Hotspur refused to answer. She balked. She hung, right in the eye of the wind, and then fell off again 2 points to port, with every sail a shiver and every yard of way lost. Headsail sheets! Ordered Cargill. There was a paralyzing moment as she balked again, hung as though she was determined once more to miss stays, but this time she had a trifle more momentum, and in the last possible second of fortunate combination of wind and wave, pushed her bows round through the vital final degrees of swing. Full and by, said Cargill to the helmsman, the relief very evident in his voice. Fore tack there! Sheets! Braces!" "The ship's trimmed too much by the head," said Hornblower. "We'll have to trim her so that she draws 6 inches more aft. Now, what is there we can shift aft?" "Well," began Bush, and they were instantly deep in highly technical discussion. "There's a vacant port right aft on each side," said Hornblower. "We'll take the number 3 guns. That should be exactly right." "And leave a gap, sir?" asked Bush. "It certainly would. As conspicuous as a missing front tooth." "I'd rather have an ugly ship afloat," said Hornblower, "than a good-looking one on the rocks of the lee shore." Bush passed the word for Mr. Wise, the boatswain, to have the stay tackles rigged. Hornblower walked along to his cabin and glanced round at the bare necessities there. And this was luxury. This was affluence. This was the most superlative good fortune. 9 days ago, no, 10 days now, he had been a half-pay lieutenant. A single night had changed all this, and he had been appointed commander and given the Hotspur to prepare for sea. At this moment, he nearly lost his footing as Hotspur heaved up her bows, rolled, and then cocked her stern in the typical motion of a ship close-hauled. He had lost his sea legs. He could feel a cold sweat on his skin and the first wave of nausea rising to his throat. Then the sickness struck horribly, and he lay face downwards across his cot. What was that? Someone pounding vigorously on the door. "What is it?" "Message from Mr. Prowse, sir. Wind's freshening and hauling forward. Course would have to be altered, sir." "Very well, I'll come." He braced himself, and then plunged out onto the quarter-deck. Prowse came up at once. "Course is southwest by south now, sir. Wind still backing westerly." "So I see. How's the glass?" "Hardly fallen at all, sir." Bush appeared at this moment, touching the hat that was now pulled down hard onto his head. "The guns are shifted aft, sir." "Thank you. Mr. Cargill, let's see you tack the ship again, now that we've altered her trim." "Aye, aye, sir. Hands about ship." The order was instantly underlined by the calls of the boatswain's mates and the bellowings of Mr. Wise. Hornblower walked up to the wheel. "Does she gripe?" he asked the quartermaster. "Can't say that she does, sir. Just a touch of weather. Helm's all she needs now, sir." "That's as it should be," said Hornblower. "See that I'm called when any alteration of course is necessary, if you please, Mr. Bush." "Aye, aye, sir." He forced himself somehow to walk aft to his cabin. He wrenched open the door, hung suspended for a moment as Hotspur completed her pitch, and then crashed down groaning onto his cot. Hornblower sat at the desk in his cabin holding a package in his hand. Instructions for Horatio Hornblower, Esquire, Master and Commander, His Majesty's sloop Hotspur. He took out his penknife and cut the stitching. There were 3 rolls of coins, golden coins, 50 small ones, about the size of sixpences, 20 large ones, and 10 larger still. Altogether it made a considerable sum, over £50 without allowing for the premium on gold. And here were his supplementary instructions, explaining how we should employ the money. Hornblower had to make contact with the fishermen of Brest. He had to ascertain if any of them would accept bribes. He had to glean from them all possible information regarding the French fleet in that port. Hornblower put the money and the orders back into his chest, and was about to lock it when a further thought struck him, and he counted out 10 10-franc pieces and put them into his trouser pocket. Now, with his chest locked, he was free to go on deck. Prowse and Bush were hurriedly moving over to the lee side, leaving the weather side for their captain, but Hornblower halted them. "Mr. Bush, Mr. Prowse, we're going to look into Brest, and see what our friend Boney is up to." Those few words told the whole story to men who had served in the last war, and who had beaten about in the stormy waters off the Brittany coast. "Yes, sir," said Bush, simply. "I suppose you have plans for exercising the crew, Mr. Bush?" "Yes, sir." "I shall now inspect, if you will be so kind as to accompany me, Mr. Bush." "Aye, aye, sir." Hornblower began by glowering down at the starboard side quarter-deck carronade. Everything was in order there, and he walked down into the waist to inspect the starboard side 9-pounders. He stopped at the marine stationed at the fore-hatchway. "What are your orders?" The marine stood stiffly at attention, feet at an angle of 45 degrees, musket close in at his side, forefinger on the left hand along the seam of his trousers, neck rigid in its stock. To allow no one to go below unless he is carrying an empty cartridge bucket. That was so that cowards could not take refuge below the waterline, Hornblower continued down the after hatchway to where the surgeon and his loblolly boy were ready to deal with the wounded. Hornblower knew that he himself might at some time be dragged in there with blood streaming from some shattered limb. It was a relief to ascend to the main deck again. He cast a considering eye about him, taking in the last uninspected gun, the port-side quarter-deck carronade. He selected a position where the largest possible number of ears could catch his words. "Mr. Bush, we have a fine ship. If we work hard, we'll have a fine crew, too. If Boney needs a lesson, we'll give it him. You may continue with the exercises." "Aye, aye, sir." "Land ho! Land ho!" yelled the lookout of the fore topmast head. "Land 1 point on the lee bow." That would be France, Ushant, the scene of their future exploits, perhaps where they would meet with disaster or death. "Sponge your guns," bellowed Bush. "Load!" Prowse was offering his telescope. "That's a light tower on Ushant, sir." "Thank you, Mr. Prowse. Wind's drawing westerly, but it'll be dark before we can make Cape Matthew. What's the speed, Mr. Young?" 3 knots and a half, sir." "Thank you." Hornblower turned back to Prowse. "Keep her on the present course." "Aye, aye, sir." Hornblower was training his telescope out of the port bow. There was a black dot rising and falling out there towards Moline Island. "I think, Mr. Prowse, I'd like to pass that fishing boat close." "Aye, aye, sir." Within a few moments, Bush could make out the bold white letters on the stern. "From Brest, sir. Duke's Freers." With that prompting, Hornblower could read the name for himself. The Deux Frères, Brest. He took the speaking trumpet from its beckets. He had not spoken French for a considerable time, and he had to concentrate on what he was going to say. "Good day, Captain. Will you sell me some fish?" "How much?" "Oh, 20 pounds. "Very well." "Then come aboard. We can drink a glass of rum to the friendship of nations." A line over the side brought up 2 big buckets of fish, and these were followed by 2 blue-jerseyed men who scrambled up easily enough despite their sea boots. The captain looked curiously about him as he was led up to the quarter-deck and aft to the cabin. Hewitt brought rum and water, and Hornblower poured 2 generous glasses. The Frenchman sipped appreciatively. The conversation drifted on. It was an easy transition from the pleasures of peace to the possibilities of war. "I suppose they make great efforts to man ships of war?" "Oh, no," said the captain. He went on to express his contempt for the French naval authorities. There was not a single ship of the line ready for service. Of course not. "I must pay for today's supply," said Hornblower, his hand in his pocket. Astonishment followed instantly. 20 francs in gold for a couple of buckets of pilchards. "I hope we shall meet again, Captain, as of course you understand, out here at sea, we are always glad to have news of what is happening on land." The cabin was quite dark when Hornblower awoke. "2 bells, sir," said Grimes, entering the cabin with a lighted lamp. "2 bells, sir. Bit of haze, and Mr. Prowse says he'd like to go about on the other tack." "Get me my coat," said Hornblower. 12 fathoms, sir," reported Prowse, as the ship steadied on a new course with the lead going in the forechains. "Very well." There was time to dress and have breakfast. "Where's my servant?" "Sir." Grimes put his head round the chart-room door. "I'll have coffee." "Coffee, sir?" "Yes." Hornblower bit off the "damn you," he nearly added. "You don't know anything about coffee?" "No, sir." "Get the oak box and bring it in to me." Hornblower had shaved and dressed and was pacing the quarter-deck before Grimes appeared again with a panful of dubious powder. Hornblower gave him brief instructions on how to make coffee with it, and Grimes listened doubtfully. "Go and get it done. Oh, and Grimes." "Sir." "I'll have 2 eggs, fried." "Can you fry eggs?" Yes, sir." The chart-room was a minute compartment beside his cabin. Hornblower squeezed himself into the chair at the little table. Here were the eggs. The rim of the whites was black. The yolks were obviously hard. Grimes's hand holding the coffee-pot was shaking, and when Hornblower looked up he could see that his lips were trembling too. There was a knocking at the door. "Come in." "Message from Mr. Young, sir," said Oric. "Wind's veering again." "I'll come," said Hornblower. Prowse was peering out to port through his telescope. It was almost full daylight, and the haze had dissipated with the rain. "Black storms broad on the port beam, sir. You can see the breakers sometimes." "Excellent," said Hornblower. "Mr. Bush, get the topgallants in, if you please, and the courses. Topsails and jibs all we need." "Aye, aye, sir." That way they would attract less notice. Also they would, by moving more slowly, have longer for observation as they crossed the passage that led into Brest. Hotspur crept along. The day was cloudy but clear, and the horizon was extending every minute. There was the mainland of France, Point St. Matthew, in plain view. "We must keep out of long cannon shot of the shore," said Hornblower. "Deck!" yelled Orrick. "I can see masts now, can just see him." "Count all you can see, very carefully, Mr. Orrick." Orrick went on with his report. "That makes 12 of the line, sir. No topmast hoisted, no yards crossed." "Breakers on the lee bow," a seaman interrupted. "That's the parquet," said Hornblower. The black stones on the one side, the parquet on the other marked off the passage into Brest. "Mr. Poole, wear the ship if you please." Hotspur settled sweetly on a new course. Hornblower was growing intimate with her ways, like a bridegroom learning about his bride. The ship was alive with a new atmosphere. Everyone on board was conscious that they were bearding Boney in his den, that they were boldly looking into the principal naval base of France. Orrick reappeared, and Hornblower listened to his report. There were 6 frigates, 3 with their topmasts sent up, and 1 with her yards crossed and sails furled. "That is excellent," said Hornblower. "We must look in like this every day if possible. Now let's find some more fishing boats." There were busy days, during which Hornblower had friendly chats with fishing boats' captains, and dispensed gold pieces in exchange for a small portion of their catch. He could study the approaches to Brest with its tides and its currents. To man the fleet that lay idle in Brest would call for 20,000 men. 20,000 men needed food and clothing, and highly specialized food and clothing, moreover. These were the thoughts that occupied Hornblower's mind as Hotspur stood in once more past the parquet for a fresh look into Brest. "Deck! There's a ship coming down the channel." "Steady as you go," growled Hornblower. "Mr. Cargill, we'll hoist our colours, if you please." Hotspur stole quietly along. There was no purpose in hurriedly setting additional sail and pretending to be innocent. The French fleet must have heard from a dozen sources about her continued presence in the approaches. Hornblower did not want to run away. A bold move would stimulate his crew, would impress the French, and, this was the point, would subdue his own doubts about himself. "We must render passing honours, Mr. Bush." "Aye, aye, sir." "Do you remember the procedure, Mr. Bush?" Never in his life had Hornblower rendered honours to a French ship of war. Through his whole professional career until now, sighting had meant fighting. "Yes, sir." "Then be so good as to give the orders." "Aye, aye, sir." "All hands, stand by to pipe on the beat of the drum." The ships were closing steadily on their converging courses. Hornblower put away his telescope. "Now!" "Drum!" ordered Bush. The drummer beat a long roll. "Present arms!" The pipes of the boatswain's mates twittered, long and agonizingly. Hornblower took off his hat and held it before his chest. The offhand salute with hand to the brim was not for this occasion. He could see the French captain on his quarterdeck now, a bulky man, holding his hat over his head in the French fashion. The hands were excited. Never in any of their lives had they passed a French ship of war without guns firing. "She's the Loire, surely enough, sir," said Bush. They could see the name entwined in gilded letters amid the scrollwork of the frigate's stern. "And you were right, sir. Not to run away from them." "It's given our fellows a close look at a Frenchman," said Hornblower uneasily. "Look, he's getting in his topgallants. Quick, time him. We'll see what sort of seamen they are." Now it was blowing a gale, a 2-reef gale from the westward. Hornblower came out onto the quarterdeck. He was pallid with seasickness because the change of motion had found him out. "Anything amiss?" he asked Bush. "Only trifles, sir, except for the stream anchor. That's secure again now." Bush had a grin on his face, and his eyes were dancing. Obviously he enjoyed this change of climate, this bustling of the wind and the activity it called for. Hornblower took his glass and looked about him. Momentarily the weather was fairly clear and the horizon at some distance. He went back into his cabin to conceal another flurry of seasickness. Some time after the misery had in part subsided, he was summoned by a thundering at the door. "What is it?" "Lookout's hailing from the masthead, sir. Mr. Bush is calling him down." "I'll come." Hornblower emerged just in time to see the lookout transfer himself to the backstay. Bush turned to Hornblower. "I couldn't hear what this man was saying, sir, thanks to the wind, so I called him down." "Well, what do you have to say?" "Don't rightly know if it's important, sir, but during the last clear spell I caught a glimpse of the French frigate." "What do you think, Mr. Bush?" "I expect she anchored last night in Berthen Bay, sir." "We'll hold our course," said Hornblower. At that moment the masthead yelled again. "There she is, sir, 1 point before the starboard beam." "She's there all right, sir," said Bush, training his glass. "Hide and seek. Mr. Bush, I believe we are at war." "I think you're right, sir." "I think you had better send the hands to the quarters, Mr. Bush. Clear for action, but don't run out the guns." "Aye, aye, sir." Bush's grin revealed his instant excitement. Now he was bellowing his orders, and the pipes were twittering through the ship. Now here was Navy life epitomized in these last few minutes. "Sir," said Bush, "Mr. Wise is asking on behalf of the hands, sir, are we at war?" "Any man in this ship who thinks there's a different way of doing his duty in peacetime is likely to have his back scratched, Mr. Wise. Say that to the hands." This chase, this race, might continue for hours, even for days, and there was no purpose in fatiguing all hands prematurely. The gale developed a new gust within itself, and the Loire faded from sight again, while the Hotspur plunged and tossed like a toy boat as she battled against wind and wave. "Call me when she's in sight again," said Hornblower. He said these words with enormous dignity. Then it was an exhausting physical exercise to struggle aft again back into his cabin. His dizziness exaggerated the leaping of the deck under his feet and the swing of his cot as he sank groaning across it. Side 2. The Loire was going faster through the water than Hotspur, gaining in the race to that extent. It's not to be wondered at. Hornblower tried to speak coldly or nonchalantly, determined to maintain his dignity as captain. "She's twice our size." He met the gaze of his two subordinates who were looking to him to make the next move in the crisis. "I'm going to put the ship about, Mr. Cargill." He felt the beating of his heart, and noticed that he was enjoying this moment of danger. "Handsomely now," he growled to the hands at the wheel. "Put your wheel down." Hotspur was turning fast, and still carrying so much way that the rudder could bite effectively, checking the swing before she could turn too far. "Haul off all!" Hotspur had won back some of a precious lead, and Hornblower's second line of defence was proving at least stronger than his first, but once settled on the new tack, the Loire's natural advantages asserted themselves once more. "Time to go about again, sir?" asked Bush, tentatively. "We'll wait a little longer," said Hornblower. "We'll wait for that squall." He took the speaking trumpet. "Stand by to go about." "God!" exclaimed Bush. He was too disconcerted, too dumbfounded to finish the oath. For there was Loire emerging from the squall, comfortably on the same tack as Hotspur. The French captain was no fool, evidently. Hornblower turned away and tried to pace the heeling deck, to think out all the implications. This was a dangerous situation, as dangerous as the worst he had envisaged. "In another 2 hours," said Prowse, "the Frenchman will have us under his guns. You can see we'll weather Ushant." "Maybe, sir." "Comfortably," went on Hornblower. He had thought more than once about that possibility, of weathering Ushant so close that Loire would not be able to hold her course. Then Hotspur would free herself from pursuit like a whale scraping off a barnacle against a rock. "But even if we weather Ushant, we'll be within range by then, sir." "We'll see when the time comes," Hornblower replied curtly. Some way ahead lay Ushant and his plan to shake off the Loire. But before that, he had to tack twice more at least, each time with its possibilities of making a mistake, of handing Hotspur and himself over to the enemy. The hands seemed to be actually enjoying this sailing contest. They were light-hearted, revelling in the business of cheating the wind and getting every inch of way out of the Hotspur. "Look at that!" yelled Bush. "Look at that, sir! We've fooled him properly!" Loire had gone about. There she was, just settling down on the starboard tack. The French captain had been too clever. He had decided that Hotspur would go about when concealed by the squall, and had moved to anticipate her. "Keep her going there," he shouted to the wheel. "Let her fall off a little. Steady as you go." The race was resumed, both ships plunging along, battling with the unremitting gale. "She's running out her gun, sir," said Bush, a little unnecessarily. "Yes." There was no purpose in imitating her example yet. It would be the lee-side guns that Hotspur would have to run out. They would increase her heel and render her much less weatherly. The lookouts at the fore-topmast head were yelling, "Land, sir!" "Where away?" "On the lee bow, sir." Hornblower looked across at Prowse. "That'll be Ocean, sir. We ought to weather it with plenty to spare." "I want to be sure of that." "He's opening fire now, sir." Hornblower whipped round, just in time to see a puff of smoke vanishing in the gale and then others all down the Loire side. "How long before we're up to the land?" "Less than an hour, sir. Maybe half. It ought to be in sight from the deck any minute." Hornblower checked the position of the Loire again. "I want crew sufficient for the guns at the port side." "Aye, aye, sir, port side. I want the port side guns run out when we go about, Mr. Bush. Then I want them run in again like lightning. Then they're to cross to the starboard side and run those guns out ready to open fire. You understand, Mr. Bush?" "Yes, sir." The spirit of mischief asserted itself in Hornblower's mind along with his excitement, and he raised the trumpet. "Mr. Wise, if you think proper, you can tell the hands we're at war. Mr. Cargill, the moment you get my signal, run the jib up the stay, and then flat it out to port. I'm relying on you to keep us from being laid flat aback." "Yes, sir." "Keep your glass on the Frenchman, Mr. Prowse. Tell me just what he's doing." "His helm a lee, sir. He's coming round." This was the danger point. Hornblower screamed into the speaking trumpet. "Brace all back again. Jump to it, quartermaster. Hard a port, Mr. Cargill." With his tremendous leverage on the bowsprit, the jib, given a chance, would turn the ship back irresistibly. "She's coming before the wind. Stand by. Quartermaster, meet her as she swings." Hornblower could see the Loire now that Hotspur had completed a turn, but Prowse was still reporting. "She's in irons, sir. All aback." That was the very thing Hornblower had hoped for. "You gunners, hold your fire until her mainmast comes into your sights." They were level with her. Number 1 gun went off with a crash, the others in a straggling roll. Hornblower saw the splinters fly from the Frenchman's side, saw the holes battered in it. "Shall we come to the wind and finish her off, sir?" asked Bush. "No." Despite the advantage gained by firing an unanswered broadside, Hotspur was far too weak to enter voluntarily into duel with Loire. "Helm a weather, Mr. Prowse. Back the main topsail, if you please." "Aye, aye, sir." "Mr. Prowse." Hornblower gazed by a glass at Ushant the precious distance they had lost to leeward. "Put the ship on the port tack, close hauled, if you please." "Close hauled on the port tack, aye, aye, sir." "We shall have to beat tack. Call me when the watch is changed." He set his tired legs in motion towards his cabin, and paused at the spot where the greatest number of people could hear his words to repeat them later. "We are going back to watch Brest again, Loire or no Loire." It was a lovely summer day. A few cumulus clouds supplied relief to the blue sky. Hotspur was hardly rocking at all as she lay hove to in the approaches to Brest. Well in sight, only 3 miles out to sea, lay the inshore squadron, burly 2-deckers lying placidly, ready at any minute to support Hotspur and the 2 frigates, Doris and Naiad, should the French decide to come out and drive off these insolent sentries. "Mr. Foreman, the Tonnant's signalling. Hurry up now." "Send boat, it says, sir." "Acknowledge and clear away the quarter-boat." "Aye, aye, sir. Acknowledge." Hornblower remembered his unfinished dinner. "Call me when the boat returns, if you please, Mr. Bush." The boat was deeply laden, right down to her gunwales. As she approached, there came a strange roaring noise, a kind of bellow. "Fresh meat, by God!" said Bush. Slings were passed beneath it, and soon it lay on deck. A miserable, undersized bullock, lowing faintly. Foreman completed his report. "Tonnant brought 24 cattle out for the fleet from Plymouth, sir. This one's our share." Were there no messages from the fleet? Foreman started guiltily and plunged his hand into his pocket to produce a bulky packet. Hornblower snatched it from his hand. There were 3 official letters and a mass of private ones. The first was signed William Cornwallis, Vice Admiral. The next, Edward Pellew, Captain of the Tonnant. The third abandoned the formal Sir, which began the others. My dear Hornblower, it is with the greatest of pleasure that I hear that you are serving under me. Please consider yourself at liberty to make any suggestions for the confounding of the French. Your sincere friend, Edward Pellew. Hornblower then read several times that he was Maria's dearest husband, and that their marriage, already so blissful, was now to be further blessed. Hornblower opened her next letter in haste and found the news confirmed. There might be a Christmas baby, or a New Year's child. So that was the news. He would have to write a letter full of affection and full of delight at the news, whether he were delighted or not. He must never let her guess at the quality of his feelings for her, because that would be a cruelty that he could not contemplate. Grimly he applied himself to his task. He made himself write it. He made himself read and reread it. It was with eager relief that he finally laid the letter aside and reached for a fresh sheet of paper. He wrote rapidly and with little pause for consideration, because fantastically his plans had reached complete maturity during his preoccupation with Maria. He wrote the conclusion. Respectfully submitted by your obedient servant, Horatio Hornblower. He wrote the address. Captain Sir Edward Pellew, K.B., His Majesty's ship Tonnant. When the second letter was sealed, he held the 2 of them in his hand, new life in the one, and death and misery in the other. But that was a fanciful thought. Of far more importance was the question as to whether Pellew would approve of his suggestions. Hornblower lay stretched out on his cot waiting for the time to pass. Grimes knocked at the door and entered. They're calling the watch, sir. Thank you, I'll come. Tonnant's signalling again, sir, but it's a 91 signal, reported Foreman. It had been agreed that all flag signals from Tonnant preceded by the numerals 91 should be disregarded. Tonnant was only making them to deceive the French. Stand the hands to the braces, if you please, Mr. Bush. Fill the main topsail and lay her on the starboard tack. Starboard tack? Aye, aye, sir. Hornblower was feeling nervous. He did not want to leave the Toulangay passage too far behind him. Inshore squadrons, hold its wind, sir. Thank you. Send the topgallant masts down. Set the fore and main topmast staysails. Get the foresail in. Hornblower had altered the silhouette of the Hotspur as entirely as he could. With only her fore and aft sails and her main course set, even an experienced seaman on this dark night would have to look twice or thrice to recognize what he saw. Mr. Bush, choose the best 2 hands you know with the lead, and send them aft to me. Aye, aye, sir. Now you may clear for action. Aye, aye, sir. There was a roar and a rattle as the hands went to their quarters, as the gun ports opened and the guns were run out. Then silence closed in upon the ship. Everything was ready, as the Hotspur reached silently down to the southward with the wind 1 point abaft the beam. 2 bells, sir, whispered Prowse. This was the moment when the tide would be running at its fastest, a 4-knot tide, rising a full 30 feet, racing up through Toulangay Passage. Hornblower stared through the night-glass. Here was the shadowy shoreline just visible. Rocky bottom now, sir, shoaling a little. Quartermaster, 2 points to port. Look, sir, look, whispered Bush urgently. 1 point before the beam. Yes, a shadowy shape, a darker nucleus on the dark surface, other dark shapes beyond. There had been 50 coasters by the last intelligence at Camaret, and the chances were they would try the run altogether. Warn the guns crews, wait for my order, and then make every shot tell. Aye, aye, sir. There was a yell from the nearest coaster, a whole series of hails and shouts and warnings. Open fire, Mr. Bush! The din was continuous now, as guns fired as the carriage trucks rumbled over the deck, as gun captains bellowed orders. Foreman was yelling, wild with excitement, to the crew of the quarterdeck carronade. She's aground! Hornblower swung round to look. The coaster there was undoubtedly on the rocks and consequently not worth firing at. "Wear the ship, Mr. Prowse. Main change there. Take a cast of the lead. 2 fathoms." Hotspur was steady on her new course as another unhappy coaster loomed up. Then came the crash of the firing. Looking over the quarter, Hornblower could see a coaster escaping past Hotspur's stern. "Luff a little, Mr. Bush. Stand by with the port-side guns as we luff." The guns went off almost together, and Hornblower thought he could hear the crash of the shot upon the coaster's hulls. But now there was only half an hour of flood tide left. "Time to say goodbye," he said to Prowse. "Hands to the braces, hands where ship." With the wind just abaft the beam, Hotspur handled easily. "Slack water now, sir," reported Prowse. "Thank you." All was well. Hotspur had gone in and come out again. The coasters from the south had received a lesson they would not forget for a long time. "What's that noise?" asked Hornblower, referring to a dull thumping somewhere forward. "Carpenter's plugging a shot hole, sir," explained Bush. "Anyone hurt?" "No, sir." "Very well. You may set the ordinary watches, Mr. Bush, and see that I am called at 8 bells in the middle watch." "Aye, aye, sir." "Oh, Mr. Bush, sir? I'll be sending a boat to Tonnant during the morning watch. If any officer, or any of the men, wish to send letters, that will be their opportunity." "Aye, aye, sir. Thank you, sir." Daylight was coming up fast when Hornblower arrived on deck. In the glittering dawn, the half-tide revealed wrecks littering the shoals and the shore, the coasters which had paid the penalty of trying to run the blockade. "They're all hulled and waterlogged, sir," grumbled Bush. "That's a tidy sum in prize money over on those rocks." No doubt. But in those decisive moments last night, there could have been no question of capture. Hotspur's duty had been to destroy everything possible and not to fill her captain's empty purse. Hornblower stood ready to go down the side into the waiting boat, leaving Bush in command. He scrambled into the stern sheets, embarrassed by hat and gloves and sword and boat cloak, and he barked an order to Hewitt. It was over 8 weeks since Hornblower had last set foot outside the ship. He swallowed hard, battling against the seasickness which had leapt out of ambush for him. To divert his mind, he concentrated his attention upon the Tonnant growing slowly nearer, much too slowly. Hornblower realized that this meeting to which he had been summoned by the curt signal, "All captains," was something more than a sociable gathering. The deck of the Tonnant seemed incredibly spacious after the cramped deck of the Hotspur, for she was an 84, with dimensions and scantlings worthy of a 3-decker. "Captain Hornblower, sir," announced the young gentleman, throwing open the door. "Delighted to see you, Hornblower," said Pellew. "Genuinely delighted." Hornblower shook hands with Cornwallis, mumbling the same politeness as he had already addressed to Pellew. Other introductions followed: Grindle of the Prince, Marsfield of the Minotaur, Lord Henry Paulet of the Terrible, and half a dozen others. "Dinner, gentlemen," announced the steward when all were done. A door, thrown open in the midship's bulkhead, revealed the dining room, and Hornblower found himself seated between Lord Henry Paulet and Hosier of the Fame, and opposite him was Cornwallis himself. "Pellew provides good dinners," said Lord Henry, eagerly scanning the dishes with which the stewards were now crowding the table. "That's a ragout of pork beside you, Captain Hosier," said Pellew, "or so my chef would call it. You may find it even saltier than usual, because of the bitter tears he shed into it. The poor fellow had to make do with the contents of the brine tub." "But fresh vegetables," said Lord Henry ecstatically. "Cauliflower." "Your quota is on the way to your ships at this moment, Hornblower," said Cornwallis. "We try not to forget you." "Spring greens, Lord Henry," said Pellew. "How do you get these chickens so fat, Sir Edward?" asked Grindle. Hornblower had thought of helping himself to chicken, but as a junior officer he knew better than to anticipate his senior's second helpings. "Won't you try the galantine, Lord Henry?" asked Pellew. "Steward, a fresh plate for Lord Henry." Hornblower found himself thinking that if ever he became a post-captain, wealthy with prize money, he would have to devote endless thought to the organization of his cabin stores. "There'll be lively times in Plymouth when the Channel Fleet comes in," said Andrews. "The Channel Fleet will not be coming into Plymouth," said Cornwallis. "This is the time to make that plain." So we'll have to wait for the winter gale, sir. Not even then. No ship, no captain is to enter Plymouth without my express orders. The reasons were as obvious to Hornblower as to the others. Plymouth Sound was difficult. A wind from the eastward would delay the British fleet's exit, prolong it over several days, perhaps. So none of us will set foot on English soil again until the end of the war, sir, said Collins. Cornwallis's face was transfigured by a smile. We need never say that. All of you, any one of you, can go ashore. The smile broadened as he paused, the moment I set foot ashore myself. As the conversation reverted to a discussion of future operations, Hornblower could feel the flush of blood under his skin that foretold the development of a plan. He had reached every necessary decision by the time the party began to break up, and he made it his business to take his stand, casually, beside Collins at the moment the Admiral's barge was called. Is there anyone in the Channel Fleet who speaks perfect French, sir? You speak French yourself. Not well enough for what I have in mind, sir. There's Cottard, lieutenant in the Marlborough. He's a Guernsey man, speaks French like a native. What do you want him to do? Hardly time to tell you now, sir. I can submit a plan to Sir Edward, but it'll be no use without someone speaking perfect French. The assembled company was now filing to the gangway. I'll detail Cottard from his ship on special service. I'll send him over to you, and you can look him over. Cornwallis was now thanking his host and saying goodbye to the other captains. Goodbye, sir, said Hornblower, holding out his hand to Pellew. Goodbye, Hornblower. Hornblower quickly stepped back, touching his hat. The pipe squealed until his head was below the level of the main deck, and then he dropped perilously into the boat, hat, gloves, sword and all of them shabby. You are sure about your orders until I return, Mr. Bush? Yes, sir. Hornblower had felt a cold wave up his spine while he spoke so casually about the possibility of his death. Then I'll get myself ready, he said, turning away with every appearance of nonchalance. The minutes were fleeing by, as they always did with the final touches to put on to a planned scheme. Hornblower passed his belt through the loop on a cutlass sheath and buckled it round him. He gave a final thought to taking a pistol, and again rejected the idea. A pistol might be useful in certain circumstances, but it was a bulky encumbrance. On deck, it was pitch dark, and Hornblower's eyes took long to adjust themselves. Officer after officer reported already. You're sure of what you had to say, Mr. Cottard? Yes, sir. 51 rank and file present, sir, reported the captain of the Marines. Thank you, Captain Jones. You've made sure no musket is loaded. Yes, sir. The lobster boat, seized early in the night to the surprise of its crew, lay alongside. Sanderson, Hewitt, Black, Downs, take the oars. The rest of you get down below the gunwales. There was no need for a silent or invisible approach. On the contrary, the lobster boat had to appear as if she were approaching on her lawful occasions. There was the jetty. Now came the loud voice of the sentry. Qui va là? Cottard was ready. Camille, lobster boat. Captain Cuyenne. Black, the burly captain of the forecastle, knew what he had to do, and leapt up from the bows like a panther. A quick grab, and it was finished. Black lowered the body onto the slimy stone flags of the jetty. Now Hornblower had 8 men at his back, as he set his face to the steep climb up the path he had only seen through the telescope from Hotspur's deck. The towering telegraph had been plainly in view, and at its foot just a hint of a roof. But they had not been able to see what was at ground level here. Hewitt, Cottard, do you see anything? Looks like a house, whispered Cottard. Come on. They dashed forward, and the axeman shattered a window and went leaping through, followed by Cottard. A woman's voice rose to a scream. The boat was drawn and the door swung open, and Hornblower burst in. Cottard stood in the centre of the room with sword and pistol, and at the far side stood a screaming woman. Decisions had to be made. Those screams might have given the alarm, and probably had done so. Hornblower had come to burn the semaphore, and burn it he would, even if a civilian dwelling were involved. Get that woman outside and keep her quiet. Cottard, up that ladder. Bring down all the signal books you can find. That's the place, snapped Hornblower, pointing to the foot of the telegraph mast. There were the great bulks of timber round it, and he and Hewitt started pushing the furniture under them. Cottard came scrambling down the ladder with one arm full of books. "Now, let's start the fire," said Hornblower. Hewitt unlatched the door of the stove, set his back to the wall and shoved. The stove fell and rolled, scattering its embers over the floor. "That'll burn," said Cottard. Outside the air was keen and clear, with the first glimmer of daylight. The interior of the cottage was all ablaze, and now there was light enough in the sky for Hornblower to see the immense mast of the telegraph against it. From the misty valley on their right, as they faced the descent, came the notes of a musical instrument, some trumpet or bugle. "That's the Marines," said Cottard. "Yes," snapped Hornblower. "Come on." He led the way to the great battery with its 4 32-pounders, looking through the embrasures of its curving parapet. Hornblower wasted no time in discussion. "Stand aside, axeman." A dozen blows and there was a way open through the door. "I'll go," said Hornblower. He could trust no one but himself. He seized the reel of quick match and squeezed through the shattered door, drawing his cutlass and snarling in the darkness with the intensity of his emotion. Twice he stabbed into the wall of cartridges, and his ears were rewarded by the cascade of powder grains pouring out. The light through the broken door was dazzling, and he blinked as he came out crouching through it, still unreeling the quick match. "Cut me a yard of that," said Hornblower, pointing to the slow match. "Captain Jones, warn everybody to be ready to retreat. At once, please. Give me that burning fuse, Black." An inch and a half, 3 minutes. Hornblower scrambled to his feet and leapt up on the parapet. The Marines were trooping past him, with Cottard and his seamen bringing up the rear. "Better hurry, Cottard, come on!" Then it happened. The earth moved back and forth under their feet so that they tripped and stumbled while a smashing, overwhelming explosion burst on their ears. Behind Hornblower's back, Cottard was staggering, his sword and the books and papers he had carried all this time fallen to the ground at his feet. Then Hornblower noticed his left arm, which was swaying in the air as if hanging by a thread. "Help Mr. Cottard down! Put a scarf round his arm above the wound and strain it tight!" It was a wild dash, slipping and sliding down the path to the jetty, with the French yelling in pursuit. But here was the covering party, as Hornblower had ordered so carefully the day before. 12 Marines knelt at the barricade, 12 muskets levelled themselves over it. At the sight of them, the pursuing French hesitated, tried to halt. "Now, Sergeant, let them have it." "Fire!" That was a good volley, but there was not a moment to admire it. "Come on," yelled Hornblower, "over to the launch." Now the oars were grinding in the rowlocks. "Hewitt, get forward to the gun. It's loaded with grape. Fire when it bears." 9 quarter-pound grape-shot balls swept through the group on the jetty. Bonaparte had 250,000 soldiers under arms, but he had now lost some of them. A sudden thought struck Hornblower, and he turned and stared back over his shoulder. He actually had to look twice, although he knew what he was looking for. The semaphore was gone. And there was Hotspur waiting for them, main topsail aback, as he had seen her half an hour ago. Hornblower seized the entering ropes and swung himself up. He cut Bush's congratulations short. "Get the wounded out as quick as you can, Mr. Bush. Send a stretcher down for Mr. Cottard." "Is he wounded, sir?" "Yes. The surgeon's ready?" "He started work, sir." Hornblower headed for his cabin. No need to explain that he had his report to write. No need to make excuses. But as always, after action, he yearned for the solitude of his cabin, even more than he yearned to sink down and forget his weariness. He walked firmly into the cabin, a little like someone unwillingly going into a duel. He did not want to. He hated this place. But in a tiny ship like Hotspur, he had nowhere else to go. He had to use this place, and the longer he contemplated the prospect, the less inviting it would be. Hornblower had written the address, the date, and the word "Sir" before he realized that the report would not be easy to write. He was quite sure that this letter would appear in the Gazette, where it would be read by all England, and that meant by Maria too. It would open a peephole into this life that so far she had never been able to look through. Well, it had to be written. There was no avoiding it. For that matter, there was no postponing it. He was still thinking when Bush came hurrying in the door. "Captain, sir, I'd like to show you something from the deck." "Very well, I'll come." Bush pointed towards the inshore squadron where Pellew's broad pendant flew. But the broad pendant was to fly there no longer. The boat that took Hornblower's report to the Tonnant returned not only with stores but with official dispatches. "Sir, the Commodore sent a man with me from the Tonnant who carries a letter for you." "Where is he?" He seemed a very ordinary sort of seaman, dressed in the standard clothes of the slop chest. Hornblower took the letter and broke the seal. "Rear Admiral William Parker will take over the command of the inshore squadron, and I have recommended you to him in the strongest terms. I noted in your report that you have had the misfortune to lose your steward, and I take the liberty to send you James Doughty as a substitute. Your sincere friend, Edward Pellew." "Doughty." "Sir?" "You're going to be my servant. Do your duty, and you have nothing to fear." "Yes, sir." "No, sir." "Then you can take up your duties." "Aye, aye, sir." "Have you had your dinner, sir?" "No, I haven't. You'd better see about something for me." Hornblower went out on deck to pace off his bad temper. The first breath of the delightful evening air helped to soothe him. So, too, did the hurried movement of everyone on the quarter-deck over to the lee side so as to leave the weather side to him. Now Pellew was leaving them, and that was a disaster. Earlier today, Hornblower had actually allowed his mind to dally with the notion that some day he might know the inexpressible joy of being made post, of being promoted to captain. That called for the strongest influences, in the fleet and in the Admiralty. With Pellew's transfer, he had lost a friend in the fleet. He could find himself rotting on the beach on half pay, with Maria and the child. "Your dinner's ready, sir." Doughty stood respectfully in front of him. "Very well, I'll come." Hornblower sat himself down at the chart-room table. "Lobster cutlets, sir." Extraordinary. There were neat brown cutlets on his plate that bore no outward resemblance to lobster, but when Hornblower cautiously added sauce and tasted, the result was excellent. And when Doughty took the cover off the cracked vegetable dish, there was a dream of delight revealed. New potatoes, golden and lovely. Doughty had already proved his worth. The salutes had been fired. Pellew's flag had been hoisted, and then the Tonnant had sailed away to initiate the blockade of Rochefort. The dreadnought had hoisted Admiral Parker's flag, and each flag had received 13 guns from every ship. Hornblower could count the vessels of war swinging to their anchors in Brest roads. 18 ships of the line now, and 7 frigates, but with sub-minimum crews and incomplete stores. No match for the 15 superb ships of the line and the Cornwallis who waited for them outside. Admiral Keith, with his frigates, backed by a few ships of the line, held the Channel secure against Bonaparte's threat. There was no chance of invasion as long as England held naval command of the Channel. And yet, in a sense, that command was precarious. If the 18 ships of the line in Brest roads could escape, could round Ushington come up Channel, Keith might be driven away, might be destroyed. "Mr. Foreman, signal to the flag, if you please. Enemy at anchor, situation unchanged." "Flag acknowledges, sir," reported Foreman. "7 bells, sir," reported Prowse. Only half an hour more of the ebb. Time to withdraw from this lee shore before the flood set in. "Mr. Poole, wear the ship, if you please. Course west by north." Hornblower was aware that Bush had taken his stand beside him with his telescope trained in the same direction. "The column of troops, sir?" "Yes." Hornblower swept his glass farther round the coast, and then checked it with a start and a gulp of excitement. There were the unmistakable lug-sills of a French coaster coming round the bold headland of Point Matthew. There was another pair. The whole cluster. "Prizes, sir. And that's Naiad and Doris," said Bush. The 2 British frigates must have swooped down during the night and cut out these coasters from the creeks. A neat piece of work. "Forward there!" yelled Poole from beside the binnacle. "Get the lead going in the main chains." The senior officers beside the hammock nettings came back to the present world with a general start. Hornblower had forgotten all about the course he had set. Hotspur was in danger of running aground, and it was his fault. "Thank you, Mr. Poole. Put the ship on the other tack, if you please. Hard a lee! Fore-tack! Haul the bowlines!" Hotspur settled down on a new course, away from the dangerous shore to which he had approached too close, and all danger was averted. Hornblower sauntered down the quarter-deck. "Thank you, Mr. Poole," he said slowly and very distinctly. Poole touched his hat in reply, but his homely face did not change its expression. Day after day and night after night, through the finest summer in human memory, Hotspur cruised in the approaches to Brest. They were months of frightful peril for England, with a grande armée 200,000 strong, poised within 30 miles of the Kentish beaches. Much good might that do the French, huddled in their anchored ships in the roads. The ships ready for sea might slowly increase in number, but every day the balance of fighting quality swung faster and faster over in favour of the British. There was a price to be paid. The dominion of the seas was not given free by destiny. The Channel fleet paid in blood, in lives, as well as in the sacrifice of the freedom and leisure of every officer and man on board. There was a constant petty drain. Epidemics would sweep through the fleet, while rheumatism, the sailor's disease, was always present. Hotspur's bell struck 2 double strokes. It was 6 o'clock in the evening, and the first dog-watch had come to an end in the gathering darkness. "Sunset, sir," said Bush. "Yes." 6 o'clock exactly. The equinox, sir." "Yes," agreed Hornblower again. He knew perfectly well what was coming. "Winds freshening and seas getting up a bit, sir?" "Yes." Hornblower fought down the temptation to declare that it was not because the sun happened to be set at 6 o'clock. "Thank you, sir," said Bush, touching his hat and going off about his business along the darkened reeling deck. "A white rocket and 2 blue lights from the flag, sir," reported Young. "That means take offshore stations." "Thank you." "What sail have we set?" "Double reef topsails and main course, sir." "Get that course in and lay her on a port tack." "Port tack? Aye, aye, sir." The signal for offshore stations meant a general withdrawal of the Channel fleet. But there was not merely the question of the French coming out, but of other French ships coming in. So Naiad and Doris and Hotspur had to stay close in to intercept and report. Hotspur was close-hauled now, soaring, pitching and rolling over the vast invisible waves that the gale was driving in upon her port bow. Hornblower took note that there were increases in the wind force without any corresponding decreases. With his mouth a yard from Young's ear, he yelled his order. "4 reefs in the topsails." "Aye, aye, sir." The exaggerated noises of the night were complicated now with the shrilling of the pipes of the boatswain's mates. Down in the waist the orders were bellowed at hurrying, staggering men. "All hands reef topsails." The hands clawed their way to their stations. This was the moment when 1,000 drills bore fruit. Hornblower found his way to the binnacle and studied the heading of the ship, working out mental problems of drift and leeway against the background of his mental picture of the trend of the land. Prowse was there, apparently doing the same thing. "I should think we've made our offing, sir." Prowse had to shout each syllable separately, and Hornblower did the same when he replied. "We'll hold on a little longer, while we can." Here was the grey dawn coming, and the wind was still increasing, and Hotspur could not battle against it any longer. "Mr. Cargill, we'll heave to. Put her under main-topmast staysails." Bush was offering him a telescope and pointing to windward, where there was now a grey horizon dimly to be seen. "Naiad, sir," he shouted into his ear. The frigate was several miles to windward, hove to like Hotspur. The sight of it out there was confirmation that Hotspur was on her station, and beyond her, Hornblower had glimpses of the Doris reeling and tossing on the horizon. For 4 days Hotspur lay hove to, pounded by the sea, flogged by the wind, while Hornblower made anxious calculations. It was not until the 5th day that Hotspur was able to set 3 reef topsails and thrash away back to station. It was the first day that reef topsails could be set that Hornblower reached his decision. "Mr. Prowse, I'd be obliged if you would set a course to close Naiad so that she can read our signals." "Aye, aye, sir." "Mr. Foreman, signal to Naiad, if you please. Request permission to return to port. 8 days' water. Nigh to Hotspur, sir. Remain 4 more days. Thank you, Mr. Foreman. I'll wager he has 2 months' water on board, sir, said Bush angrily. I hope he has, Mr. Bush. They were 70 leagues from Tor Bay, 2 days sailing with a fair wind. There was an actual possibility that the crew of the Hotspur might die of thirst. It had not been easy for Hornblower to make his request. He had no desire to be thought one of those captains whose sole desire was to return to port, and he had waited to the last sensible moment. Send this signal, if you please, Mr. Foreman. Thank you. Am returning to station. Goodbye. Mr. Bush, from today, the water ration is reduced. 1 between 2. 2 quarts of water a day for all purposes, and such water, to men living on salted food, was far below the minimum for health. It meant sickness as well as discomfort, but the reduction also meant that the last drop of water would not be drunk until 16 days had passed. Next day was the worst day that Hotspur had experienced in all these wild weeks. The waist was flooded most of the time now, so that she laboured heavily without relief, each wave catching her before she could free herself. Surely a wind of this force must moderate soon, even though Hornblower had a premonition that it would not. Nor did it. The slow dawn of the new day found Hotspur still labouring under the dark clouds, the waves still as wild, the wind still as insane. The time had come for the final decision. Mr. Bush, we'll get before the wind. Aye, aye, sir. Hornblower took his station, beside the wheel, where he could be clearly seen from forward. Hard a port, he yelled to the hands at the wheel. The tug of the sail on the foremast would put Hotspur right before the wind without the use of the rudder. Indeed, the rudder would only delay her acquiring all the way she could. A moment's inattention, a moment's bad luck could bring ruin. Yet here they were momentarily safe before the wind and running for the channel. All this called for serious calculation and reference to tide tables, especially in face of the fact that running before the wind like this, it would be impossible to take soundings. So it came about that Prowse was with Hornblower in the chart-room, struggling with the tide tables, when Foreman opened the door. Message from Mr. Bush, sir. Ushant in sight on the starboard beam, 7 or 8 miles, sir. Thank you, Mr. Foreman. That was a stroke of good fortune, the first they had had. Now they could plan the next struggle to bend the forces of nature to their will. There was the tentative trying of the wheel to see if it was possible to bring the wind a couple of points on the port quarter. 3 times they made the attempt, only to abandon it hastily as wind and wave rendered the ship unmanageable. But at the 4th try it became possible. Now they tore through the water, speed undiminished despite the drag of the rudder. At least the danger of running Hotspur bodily under water was now eliminated. At 4 in the morning, Hornblower was conscious of a shift in the wind. At the first watery light of dawn, they set the goose-winged foretopsail again, while Hornblower faced the problem of getting Hotspur round with a wind over her quarter without laying her over on the beam ends. Then they were thrashing along in the old way, decks continually under water, rolling until every timber groaned. It was noon before Aurochs sighted the land. Half an hour later, Bush returned to the quarterdeck from the ascent he made to confirm Aurochs' findings. Boat head, sir. Fine on the port bow. Thank you. And so Hotspur came in under goose-winged foretopsail and storm mizzen staysail round Berry Head under the eyes of the Channel fleet to claw her way in towards Brixham Pier. Flag acknowledges, sir, croaked Foreman. Very well. It was still possible to do something more without collapsing. Mr. Foreman, kindly make this signal. Need drinking water. Not even the Brixham fishermen, renowned for their small boatwork, could venture out into Tor Bay while it was in that mood, so that until the second morning at anchor the crew of the Hotspur supported an unhappy existence on 2 quart of tainted water a day. Hornblower was still only half awake when Doughty came bursting in on him. Signal from the flag, sir. Cornwallis was giving orders for the victualling and re-watering of the fleet, establishing the order in which the ships were to be replenished, and that signal gave Hotspur priority over all the rest. So now began an orgy of fresh water, clear spring water, which had not lain in the cast-iron tanks for more than a few days. It was glorious waste. Down below, the cask was swilled and scrubbed out with fresh water. The place of the watering barges was taken by the dry victualling barge, with bags of biscuit, sacks of dried peas, kegs of butter, cases of cheese, sacks of oatmeal, but conspicuous on top of all this were 6 nets full of fresh bread. There was never a quiet moment all through that day. Here was Bush touching his hat again, with a final demand on his attention. "You've given no order about wives, sir." It was usual in His Majesty's ship, when they lay in harbour, for women to be allowed on board, and 1 or 2 of them might well be wives. "Very well, Mr. Bush. When the ship's complete, in all respects, we'll allow the wives on board, but not until then." Next came the letters. 7 letters from Maria. Hornblower tore open the last first, to find that Maria was well and her pregnancy progressing favourably. He was halfway through writing a reply when a midshipman came escorted to his cabin door with a note. "His Majesty's ship Hibernia. If you can be tempted out of your ship at 3 o'clock this afternoon to dine in the flagship, it would give great pleasure to your obedient servant, William Cornwallis, Vice Admiral. P.S. An affirmative signal hung out in the Hotspur is all the acknowledgment necessary." Hornblower went out on the quarter-deck. "Mr. Foreman, signal. Hotspur to flag. Affirmative." The great stern cabin in the Hibernia was furnished in a more subdued fashion than Pellew had effected in the Tonnant, but comfortable enough. Somewhat to Hornblower's surprise, there were no other visitors. Present in the cabin were only Cornwallis and Collins, the sardonic captain of the fleet, and the flag-lieutenant, whose name Hornblower vaguely heard as one of these new-fangled double-barrelled names with a hyphen. They discussed the recent weather. Hibernia had been in Torbay for several days, having run for shelter just in time to escape the last hurricane. "How were your stores when you came in, Captain?" asked Collins. "I still had plenty, sir. Beef and pork for a month at least." "Water?" "We were pretty low when we got in. That is why we ran for it." Cornwallis rolled his blue eyes on Hornblower. "Are you ready for sea?" "Yes, sir. I could fetch Ushant with 2 tacks now." There was Maria, huddled in some lodging in Brixham at this moment, but he had to say it. Said Cornwallis, still in debate with himself. "I'm not comfortable without you watching the Goulet, Hornblower, but I can let you have 1 more day at anchor." "Thank you, sir." "We took some reasonable claret out of a prize a month ago. I wonder if you would honour me by accepting a dozen, Hornblower." "With the greatest of pleasure, sir." "I'll have it put in your boat." It was quite dark when Hornblower went down the side into the boat to find at his feet the case that held the wine. There were the lights of Torquay and of Peyton and Brixham visible. Maria was somewhere there, probably uncomfortable, for these little places were undoubtedly full of naval officers' wives. "Call me the moment the wind comes northwest by west," said Hornblower to Bush as soon as he reached the deck. When he entered his cabin, he found Doughty with a package he had removed from the case of wine. "A parcel from the Admiral's steward, sir." "Show me." "Just cabin stores, sir. Olive oil, dried herbs, marjoram, thyme, sage. And here's coffee, and pepper, and vinegar." "How the devil did you get these?" "I wrote a note, sir, to the Admiral's steward. Now I can cook for you properly." There might be flag officers and captains, but under that glittering surface was an unseen circle of stewards, with its own secret rites and passwords, managing the private lives of their officers without reference to them. Bush entered the cabin with hurried step. "Wind's northwest by west, sir. Looks as if it'll back further still." Hornblower rapped his commands. "Call all hands. Sway the topmasts up. Get the yards crossed. I want to be under way in 20 minutes. 15 minutes. "Aye, aye, sir." And this was the end of his stay in harbour, of his visit to England. Maria would be a mother when he saw her next. That conclusion called up a weak smile as Hotspur breasted the waters of the Channel, with Berry Head looming up on her starboard beam. Now it was cold, horribly cold. The days were short and the nights were very, very long. Hornblower came out on deck with the earliest light. "Merry Christmas, sir," said Bush. "Thank you. The same to you, Mr. Bush." Any news of your good lady, sir? Not yet. The letter I had yesterday was dated the 18th, but there's nothing as yet. Hornblower took the telescope into his gloved yet frozen hands, and trained it up the Goulet as he always did. 4 new ships at anchor, sir, said Bush. I make it 5. Isn't that a new one? The frigate in line with the church steeple? I'll go up to the masthead, sir. No, wait a moment, Mr. Bush. I'll go myself. Take charge of the ship, if you please. Hornblower's decision to go aloft was proof of the importance he attached to observation of the new ships. He was breathing heavily by the time he reached the foretop masthead, and it took several seconds to steady himself sufficiently to fix the ships in the field of the telescope. 2 of the new arrivals were small 2-deckers, 64s probably. Captain, sir, Bush was hailing from the deck. The tide's turned. Very well, I'll come down. 2 days later, he found himself in his cabin drinking rum with the captain of the Deux Frères. He had bought himself 6 unidentifiable fish, which the captain strongly recommended as good eating. Inevitably, the conversation shifted to the sight to be seen up the Goulet, centering on the new arrivals in the anchorage. Not to fight, explained the captain. Only for stores, or troops, or what you will. Removing the guns meant a vast increase in available deck space into which more troops could be crammed. 3,000 men plus a few hundred more in the armed escorts. The smallness of the number ruled out England. There was only one possible target, Ireland, where a disaffected population meant a weak militia. So it was, with his head swimming with rum, a sensation he detested, that Hornblower sat down at last to write his urgent dispatch, having seen his guest down the side. He sent it off, a long and arduous trip for the boat, and waited impatiently for the acknowledgment. Sir, your letter of this date has been received and will be given my full attention. Your obedient servant, William Parker. Sir, said Doughty, coming into the cabin, Mr. Prow sent me. It's snowing, sir. Very well, I'll come. He went out into a changed world, where his feet trod a thin carpet of snow on the deck, and where prows loomed up in the darkness, shimmering in the white coating of snow on his oilskins. Wind's nor by east, sir, moderate. An hour of flood still to go. Thank you. Turn the hands up and send them to quarters, if you please. They can sleep at their guns. Aye, aye, sir. 5 minutes from now I don't want to hear a sound. Aye, aye, sir. This was only regular routine. The less the distance one could see, the readier the ship had to be to open fire should an enemy loom up. Full and by, he ordered. They were as close under Petit Minou as possible, a 1/4 of a mile from those well-known hills, but there was nothing visible at all. No bottom. More than 20 fathoms. That was right. Certainly it was a good night for the French if they were determined to escape. They knew the times of ebb and flood as well as he did. Listen! Bush's elbow dug into Hornblower's ribs with the urgency of the moment. There was the sound again, a long-drawn monosyllable borne by the wind. It was a Frenchman calling, 16. 16. Lights, muttered Bush, his elbow at Hornblower's ribs again. Where ship? Hornblower snapped at prows. No time for the politeness he usually employed. There was the second ship in the French line just completing a turn, with Hotspur's bows pointing almost straight at her. Starboard a little! Meet her! Main deck! Man the starboard guns! Run 'em out! Starboard! Steady! The rumble of gun trucks had ceased. Fire! At 10 guns, 10 hands jerked at the lanyards, and Hotspur's side burst into flame. The silence that followed was broken by the crash as the Frenchman struck the shore, the clatter of falling spars, the yells of despair. Back the main topsail! Stay by the braces! He must think quicker than they. The French captain in the following ship would not have had time to collect his thoughts. Here she came, looming up, close, close, yells of panic from her forecastle. Fire! The Frenchman's sails were all a-shiver. She was not under proper control, and with those 9-pounder balls sweeping her deck she would not recover quickly. Main topsail aback! Hornblower could not spare another moment with the main topsail aback. He must fill and draw ahead even if it meant disengagement. Braces there! The next Frenchman astern had run bows on into a colleague, The first rending crash was followed by others. Hornblower strode aft to try to see, but already the darkness had closed like a wall round his blinded eyes. He could only listen, but what he heard told him the two ships were locked together and helpless. There was no chance of escape for them. As wind and current carried him away, he thought he heard the crash as they struck upon the rocks. "Main chains there! Get the lead going!" He must keep up to windward as best he could. What was that? Wind and water had brought a distinctive sound to his ears. There was a ship just up there to windward. "Stand by your guns!" There she was, looming faintly on the starboard bow. "Starboard 2 points! Meet her! Fire!" He took the speaking trumpet. "Elevate your guns! Aim for her spars!" Chaos. Out of the black snow-filled night had come a broadside, raking the Hotspur from bow to stern. "Harder starboard! Wear the ship!" Hotspur was turning even as the last guns fired into the transport. Then came the second broadside from ahead, flaring out of the darkness, a fraction of a second between each successive shot, crashing into Hotspur's battered bows. Now a voice spoke out of the darkness close to him. "Bush reporting, sir." "Very well, Mr. Bush. What's the damage?" "Foremast's gone, 6 feet above the deck, sir." "Then we'll get to work, in silence. I want every stitch of canvas got in first, and then we'll deal with the wreckage." "Aye, aye, sir." Next moment it was the carpenter up from below. "We're making water very fast, sir. We'll need hands at the pump, sir." "Very well. I'd like you to set the spritsail, Mr. Bush, if you please." "Aye, aye, sir." "By the way, a Happy New Year to you, sir. I hope your good lady—" "Thank you, Mr. Bush." It was on New Year's Day that the child was expected. Maria might be in labour at this moment, while they stood there talking. It seemed to have rained every single day since Hotspur had crawled into Plymouth Sound. The landlady's daughter opened the door to Hornblower's knock, and as he walked up the stairs to his lodgings, he heard the voice of the other Horatio loudly proclaiming his sorrows. "He's been fractious today, dear," said Maria apologetically, patting the baby's back. "I wish he would be good. I want him to smile for his father." She brought a magazine from the side table, the new number of the Naval Chronicle, and with her free hand helped Hornblower to turn the pages. "There," Maria pointed to the relevant passage. "On January 1st last," it began. It was the announcement of little Horatio's birth. "The lady of Captain Horatio Hornblower of the Royal Navy offers son," she read. "That's me and little Horatio. I'm more grateful to you, dear, than I can ever tell you." "There's something more in the Chronicle that might interest you, dear," said Hornblower, indicating his letter. The door opened to admit Mrs. Mason, her pattens clattering on her feet, raindrops sparkling on her shawl. She and Hornblower exchanged good evenings while she took off her outer clothing and then sat down across the fire from Hornblower and studied the page with more care than Maria had done, but perhaps with no more understanding. "The Admiral says your conduct was very commendable." "Yes." "Why doesn't he make you a real captain?" "The decision doesn't lie with him." "Can't admirals make captains?" "Not in home waters." "And what about prize money?" "There's none for the Hotspur." "But this Chlorinde was captured." "Yes, but we weren't in sight." "But you were fighting, weren't you?" "Yes, Mrs. Mason, but only ships in sight share in prize money." "Some captains make plenty." Hornblower had learned to keep a still tongue in his head under the goadings of tyranny when he was a lieutenant in the old Renown. Quarrelling with his mother-in-law would not help. He thought of the keen, clean air of the Atlantic and felt his lungs would burst, and although he did his best with his dinner, it was a poor best. "You're not making a very good dinner, Horatio," said Mrs. Mason, peering suspiciously at his plate. "I suppose I'm not very hungry." "Too much of Doughty's cooking, I expect." Hornblower knew already, without a word spoken, that the women were jealous of Doughty and ill at ease in his presence. "I can't abide that man," said Maria. The word was spoken now. "He's harmless enough, my dear," said Hornblower. As the landlady left the room after clearing the table, Hornblower's instincts guided him into an action of which he was actually unconscious. He threw up the window and drew the icy evening air deep into his lungs. "You'll give him his death," said Maria's voice. But as he turned back and pulled the window shut again, his mind was dwelling on bleak, harsh days and dangerous nights, on a deck that he could call his own. He was ready to go to sea again. "Signal from the Commodore, sir," reported Foreman. Chambers spent a great deal of time signalling to his little squadron. Hornblower felt irritated. The Navy was expending lives and material on an objective quite valueless, in his opinion. "What's that?" exclaimed Bush, excitedly training his telescope. "Look at that, sir! Dismasted, by God!" Just visible round the point now was a shape that could not instantly be recognized. It was the lugger, drifting disabled and helpless. Everything about the situation indicated that she had run into a well-planned ambush. Hornblower scanned the shore. With luck, all he would have to do was to haul the lugger round the corner. "Back the main topsail, Mr. Prowse, and we'll go down to her." That was when the grasshopper disintegrated, blew apart in 2 loud explosions and a cloud of smoke. It happened right under Hornblower's eyes as he leaned over with his speaking trumpet. 1 second there was the intact hull of the lugger, with living men working on the wreckage, and the next, the smoking explosions, the flying fragments, the billowing smoke. Suddenly, he heard a thump 3 yards from his feet and saw the tiny thread of smoke, the burning fuse 1/8 of an inch long. No time to think. He sprang at it, and with his gloved hand he extinguished the fuse, rubbing it to make sure the spark was out. A marine was standing by, and Hornblower gestured to him. "Throw the damn thing overboard!" Then he looked round. Every soul on that crowded little quarterdeck was rigid, posed in unnatural attitudes, as if time had momentarily stood still for everyone except himself. "What are you all thinking about? Move, damn you!" Aye, sir, aye, sir." Then another thought struck Hornblower, occasioned by the discovery that the fuse had burnt a hole in his right-hand glove. Those were the gloves Maria had given him on the dark morning when he had walked with her from the George to take Hotspur to sea. In the Eroise, comfortably sheltered with the wind to the east of south, Hotspur was completing her stores again. There were orders being bellowed on the quarterdeck, a rush of bare feet over the planking, a clatter of ropes against woodwork, and Hotspur was beginning to lean over on a new course. Hornblower was at the cabin door, bent on finding out what was the meaning of this activity which he had not ordered, when he found himself face to face with Young. "Signal from the flag, sir. Hotspur, report to Commander-in-Chief." "Thank you." On the quarterdeck, Bush touched his hat. "I put the ship about as soon as we read the signal, sir," he explained. "Very good, Mr. Bush." When a Commander-in-Chief demanded the presence of a ship, no time was to be wasted even to inform the captain. "All captains, sir." "Clear away the quarterboat, Mr. Bush." In the cabin of the Hibernia, there was only one introduction to be made, of Hornblower to Captain Graham Moore of the Indefatigable. "No need to waste time, gentlemen," said Cornwallis abruptly. "Captain Moore has brought me dispatches from London, and we must act on them promptly." British agents in Madrid had discovered the content of the secret clauses of the treaty between France and Spain. By those clauses, Spain was bound to declare war on England whenever requested by France, and until that request was made, she was bound to pay 1,000,000 francs a month into the French treasury. "The next floater is expected this autumn, gentlemen. Usually it brings about $4 millions for the Crown, and about the same amount on private account." "So it's war, sir?" asked Moore, but Cornwallis shook his head. "No. I am sending a squadron to intercept the floater. Captain Moore will request the Spaniards to alter course and enter an English port. There the treasure will be removed and the ship set free." "They'll never agree, sir." "You will have written orders to compel them. And that will be war, sir." "Yes." It was instantly obvious. Prize money. £1/4 million for the captains, something approaching £800,000. 5 captains, say £150,000 each, an enormous fortune. You've never made a penny of prize money in your life, have you, Hornblower? No, sir. It seems likely enough that you will make several pennies now. You expect the Dons to fight, sir? Don't you? Yes, sir. Are you more interested in the war than in prize money, Hornblower? Of course, sir. Hornblower came back on board Hotspur in a positively cheerful state of mind. There was the imminent prospect of £150,000 in prize money. That ought to satisfy Mrs. Mason, and Hornblower found it impossible not to dwell too long on the picture of Maria as chatelaine of a country estate. Bush, with his hand to his hat, was wearing a worried, anxious look. What is it, Mr. Bush? Your servant Doughty is under arrest for mutiny, sir. He struck his superior officer. Hornblower kept his face set like stone. Tell me what you know about this. Doughty, in the working party in the waist, had demurred on being given an order by a boatswain's mate, Maine by name. Maine had swung his starter, his length of knotted line that petty officers used on every necessary occasion, too frequently in Hornblower's judgment. And then Doughty had struck him. Maine's always been something of a bully, sir, said Bush, but this... Just then, Oryx was hastening along the deck towards them, waving a sealed letter. Orders from the Commodore, sir. Doughty could wait. Orders could not. Sir, you are requested and required to proceed immediately in His Majesty's sloop Hotspur under your command to the port of Cadiz. Set all plain sail, Mr. Prowse. Up helm, Mr. Bush. Course southwest by south. Southwest by south, aye, aye, sir. Hotspur came round, and as every sail began to fill, she gathered way rapidly. This was exhilarating, marvellous after months of confinement. For the 1000th time in his life, Hornblower decided that the king's service was like a vampire, as hateful as it was seductive. But first, he had to know more about the matter of Doughty's indiscipline. Mr. Bush, would you be kind enough to order the master-at-arms to bring him into my cabin? Aye, aye, sir. Doughty's hard blue eyes looked straight into his. What the hell did you do it for? I couldn't take a blow, sir. I suppose I've been too long with gentlemen. You'll have to await your trial. Master-at-arms, take this man away. You needn't keep him in irons, and I'll give orders about his exercise. Goodbye, sir. Hornblower had to forget about it, somehow. He had to come on deck with Hotspur flying along with every inch of canvas spread, racing over the sea like a thoroughbred horse at last given his head after long restraint. Then there were preparations to be made to ask permission of the Spanish authorities to enter the port, and there was the excitement of the prospect of getting in touch with the British representative. Pass the word for my steward, he said. Bailey, Doughty's replacement, put his hand to his forehead in salute to his captain. I expect His Majesty's consul to sup with me tonight. I want something special to offer him. There's a cut of cold beef, sir. Cold beef? For His Majesty's consul? Nonsense. Mr. Bush, I'll have to have Doughty released from confinement this evening. This ninny's no use to me. Aye, aye, sir. With the wind dropping, Hotspur had swung to her anchors, and now from the stern window of the chart-room, USS Constitution was visible. If you please, sir, asked Doughty. What is this place? Cadiz, and that's an American frigate. Until Hornblower had seen the Constitution at anchor, he had been visualizing a drab future for Doughty, as a penniless refugee on the waterfront at Cadiz. A better future than the rope, all the same. Now there was a better one still. Ships of war never had enough men. Bailey came in from the cabin with the last bottle of claret. Doughty will decant that, and Doughty, see that those glasses are properly clean. I want them to sparkle. Yes, sir. Bailey, get forward to the galley. See that there's a clear fire ready for the marrowbones. Aye, aye, sir. By the way, Doughty, can you swim? Yes, sir. Now the expected knock on the door. Boat coming alongside, sir. Very well, I'll come. Mr. Carron wasted no time, plunging into business while Hornblower filled the glasses. You're from the Channel Fleet? Yes, sir. You know about the situation, then? You know about the floater? Yes, sir. They're only waiting for it to arrive, and then Spain will declare war. Boney wants to use the Spanish Navy to help out his scheme for invading England. Not that the Dons will be much help to him. There isn't a ship here ready for sea, so the sooner you get away, the better. Here's the dispatch for the officer commanding the intercepting squadron. You had better leave within the hour. I was hoping you might sup with me this evening. Duty before pleasure, although I thank you. Carron was already rising to his feet, with Hornblower following his example. Call the consul's boat, said Hornblower as they emerged on the quarterdeck. When Carron had left, Hotspur immediately broke anchor and started gliding down the bay again before the first gentle puffs of the nightly land breeze. It was only after the pilot had left them, and Hotspur was standing out of the southwestward, that Hornblower had a moment to spare for Bush. Sir, doubt he's gone. Gone? Yes, sir. He must have nipped out of the stern window of your cabin, sir. I'm extremely angry about this, Mr. Bush. Well, sir. Well, Mr. Bush? It seems you left him alone in the cabin when the consul came on board, sir. You mean it's my fault, Mr. Bush? Well, yes, sir, if you want to put it that way. Maybe you're right. Even if I do say it. I'll mark him as R on the ship's muster, sir. Yes, you'd better do that. Cryptic initials in the ship's muster rolls told various stories. D for discharged, double D for dead, and R for run. Deserted. But there's some good news too, Mr. Bush. Treasure. Prize money, doubloons and dollars, a Spanish treasure fleet. If there were anything that could take Bush's mind off the subject of Doughty's escape from justice, it was this. It'll be millions, sir, said Bush. Yes, millions. The project might still fail. Then it would be best if the Spanish government, and the world at large, did not know that such an attempt had ever been contemplated. Captain Graham Moore's orders for the disposition of the frigate squadron were so apt that they received even Hornblower's grudging approval. During daylight they beat or ran towards America. During the night they retraced their course towards Europe. An hour before dawn, Hornblower came out on deck. Wind's nor'east by north, sir, reported Prowse. Back the mizzen topsails, if you please. They might be as much as a couple of miles ahead of station, not too unsatisfactory after a long night. Deck there! Foreman was hailing from the main topmast head. Medusa's signalling. Commodore to all ships. Sail in sight on the port bow. Nearly to windward, sir. Coming down before the wind fast. She might well be the Felicite, coming out from Cadiz. She could warn and divert the floater if she could get past the British line. That's Felicite for certain, sir, called Bush. Drummer, beat to quarters. Clear for action. Mr. Cheeseman, send this signal. Have sighted French frigate to windward. Bush exchanged glances with Hornblower. He alone, in the ship beside Hornblower, knew the objective of the British squadron. If Hotspur was parted from the other ships when the floaters should be sighted, she would lose her share of the prize money. But prize money was only one factor. The floater was a primary objective. Bush knew, too, the disparity of force between Hotspur and Felicite. A battle broadside to broadside could only end with half Hotspur's crew dead and the other half prisoners of war. The seconds crept by. Perhaps the French captain was holding a council of war on his quarterdeck. Perhaps he was merely hesitating, unable to reach a decision at this moment when the fate of nations hung in the balance. Felicite's main topsail was filling again. Helm a-weather! Tell Mr. Bush to open fire! The long British 9-pounder was the best gun in the service as far as precision went. The bore was notoriously true, and the shot could be more accurately cast than the larger projectiles. Look at that, said Prowse. Felicite's fore staysail was out of shape, flapping in the wind. A ragged cheer went up from the Hotspur's crew, and Hornblower, turning, saw that every idle hand was craning out of the gun ports, peering aft at the Frenchman. "Stand by your guns to port, hard a starboard." Hotspur wore sweetly round to the port tack. The 9 guns roared out again, and the smoke was still eddying in the waist as Hotspur tacked. The leeward position that Hotspur held was a most decided advantage. To leeward, over the horizon, lay the British squadron. The Frenchman dared not chase her for long in that direction. But at a long 3/4 of a mile, Felicite at last scored an important hit. There was a crash aloft, and Hornblower looked up to see the main yard sagging in 2 halves. "Mr. Wise, take all the men you need and secure that wreckage." Then he could put his glass again to his aching eye to see what Felicite intended to do. With every sail drawing, she was reaching towards the sunset. She had turned tail. "I want the ship ready for action again before sunset, Mr. Bush." Now for the dead, whom he had known so well. There was a bitter regret and a deep sense of personal loss as Wallace read the name. Good seaman and bad seaman, alive this morning and now gone from this world, because he had done his duty. With her battered sides and her fished mainyard, Hotspur beat her way back towards the rendezvous appointed in case of separation. "Sail ho! Sail to windward! Deck there! There's another! Looks like a fleet, sir!" There were the topsails showing now, 6 ships of the line ploughing along in line ahead, a frigate out on either flank. "Dreadnought, sir! Admiral Parker, his flag's flying. Flag to Hotspur, sir. Captain, come on board." Parker gave an impression of greyness like the weather when Hornblower was led aft to Dreadnought's quarterdeck. "You haven't heard the news?" "I've heard nothing for a week, sir." "Moore captured the Spanish treasure fleet. Where were you?" "I had an encounter with a French frigate, sir." "You missed a fortune in prize money." "So I should think, sir." "So it's war with Spain. You had better return north after Moore. Report to the Channel Fleet off Ushant for further orders." "Aye, aye, sir." There was only a small delay while the news of Hotspur's arrival was conveyed below to the Admiral. Cornwallis was shivering, huddled in a chair in his cabin, a thick shawl over his shoulders and another over his knees. "You did quite right in hanging on to Felicite. I'll endorse your report to that effect. Moore ought to be glad that there was 1 ship fewer to share his prize money." "I'm sure he didn't give that a thought, sir." "How are your stores?" "I've plenty, sir." "And your ship?" "We've plugged the shot hole, sir." "Would it break your heart if you went back to Plymouth?" "Of course not, sir." "That's as well, for I'm sending you in to refit." So he would be returning once more to Plymouth, once more to Maria. "It really was a magnificent spectacle," said Maria. The Naval Chronicle, at which Hornblower was glancing while conversing with her, used those identical words. Magnificent spectacle. "I'm sure it must have been, dear." Under his eyes was a description of the landing of the Spanish treasure at Plymouth from the frigates captured by Moore's squadron. "They say the captains will receive hundreds of thousands of pounds each. I suppose it will never be our good fortune to win anything like that, dear." "It is always possible." It was astonishing, but most convenient, that Maria was quite unaware of any connection between Hotspur's recent action with Felicite and Moore's capture of the floater. Mrs. Mason might have been more inquisitive, but she, thank God, had returned to Southsea. There was a knock at the door. It was Bush, in pea-jacket and scarf, standing hesitating on the threshold. "Come in, men. Let me take your coat, unless your news is urgent." "Hardly urgent, sir, but I felt you would like to hear it." "Well?" Bush's face split into an ecstatic grin. "Droit of Admiralty, sir. Serves him right, doesn't it, sir? You'll have to explain a little further." "All that treasure they captured in the floater, sir. It's not prize money at all. It goes to the government, as droit of Admiralty. The frigates don't get a penny. You see, sir, it was time of peace. So we didn't lose anything, sir, on account of your noble action." After Bush had left, Hornblower turned back to Maria. "He'll find his way back to the ship, all right." "So you did something noble, darling," said Maria. "Nonsense." Maria came forward to him, putting her hands up to his shoulders. "Of course you must have secrets from me. You're a king's officer, as well as my darling husband. But it is no secret that I love you, my dear. And something else that isn't a secret." Maria smiled, her face quite transfigured. "Perhaps this time it will be a little daughter?" Hotspur lay in the Eloise, and the Vitola was heaving to, close alongside. "Here's the post, sir," said the officer, handing Hornblower a small package of letters destined for the ship's company. There would be letters from Maria in it, but a letter from the Commander-in-Chief took precedence. "My dear Captain Hornblower, I hope you can find it convenient to visit me in Hibernia, as I have news for you that would be best communicated personally. Your obedient servant, William Cornwallis." Cornwallis was seated at his desk. "I've had a communication about you from the Navy Board." "Yes, sir." "They've called my attention to the consumption of stores by the Hotspur. You appear to have been expensive, Hornblower. Gunpowder, shot, sails, cordage. You've been using up these things as if Hotspur were a ship of the line. Have you anything to say?" "No, sir." "Neither have I. And that is what I shall tell the Navy Board. It's a naval officer's duty to shoot and to be shot at. Now we can leave official business and proceed to more personal matters. I'm hauling down my flag, Hornblower." "I'm sorry to hear that, sir." "It comes to us all in time. 51 years in the Navy." "Hard years too, sir." "Yes. For 2 years and 3 months I haven't set foot on shore. Doesn't all this mean anything to you, Hornblower?" "No, sir. It's a great pity that you have to retire, sir." "Nothing else?" "No, sir." "Don't you remember what is the last privilege granted a retiring Commander-in-Chief? Now it's beginning to dawn on you. I'm allowed 3 promotions. Midshipman to lieutenant, lieutenant to commander, commander to captain." "Yes, sir." "Do I have to go on? I'm going to promote you to captain. You're the best choice I can make, Hornblower." "Thank you, sir." Cornwallis rose from his chair. Now he was a Commander-in-Chief again, and Hornblower knew himself dismissed. "Goodbye, Hornblower." "Goodbye, sir." Only a shake of the hand, no further word, and Hornblower followed Collins to the quarterdeck. "You'll be in the Gazette in 3 weeks. Plenty of time to make your arrangements." "Yes, sir." Salutes, the squealing of pipes, and Hornblower went down the side. Those last words of Collins were still running through Hornblower's mind. He would have to leave the Hotspur. He would have to say goodbye to Bush and all the others. Hotspur was too small to constitute a command for a post-captain. He would have to wait for another command. But for all that, he was a captain. Maria would be delighted.